Imagine waking up on a foggy morning in 1340 with your empty stomach crying out for breakfast. For most of you, this morning won't start with the aroma of freshly ground coffee or a crispy croissant from the bakery around the corner. Instead, you'll have to make do with a bowl of gray, tasteless, and suspiciously smelling slop. At the very same time, a young man in a luxurious stone castle on a hill is choosing which of 20 varieties of tender meat to sample today. He will enjoy exquisite dishes smothered in rich sauces, to which real gold was sometimes added for prestige. The gap between the rich and the poor in the Middle Ages wasn't just a matter of how much money was in your leather purse. It was a matter of fundamental biological survival and the quality of your daily life. Today, we'll take a detailed look at why ordinary food was the main marker of social status in those harsh times. You'll learn how your daily diet could turn your life into an endless hallucinogenic trip or a slow torture for your body. Get ready, because some facts about the medieval menu will make your modern fast food look like the exquisite food of the gods. Here begins the story of how the contents of a plate divided the world into those who rule and those who are simply trying to survive until the next breakfast. If you had the misfortune of being born an ordinary farmer, your culinary life was surprisingly stable and yet frighteningly monotonous. The foundation of your diet throughout your entire life was a thick stew that everyone called pottage. This soup literally never ran out in your home, becoming a faithful companion from birth to death. It was a sort of endless culinary project to which the housewife simply added new fresh ingredients every morning. Meanwhile, the old leftovers continued to simmer and stew at the very bottom of a heavy cast iron pot over the hearth. Absolutely everything you managed to find or grow in your modest garden went into this pot without discrimination. Mostly it was onions, coarse cabbage, beans, and, if you were very lucky, a small handful of oats for thickness. Imagine a modern vegetable stew that simmers in a slow cooker for 3 years straight, without stopping and without thoroughly washing the pot. It sounds like a real culinary nightmare for a modern person, but for millions of people, it was the only reliable way to avoid starving to death. It was a specific medieval version of a slow cooker, only without convenient buttons and with a thick aroma of centuries-old acrid soot. But here it gets much more interesting, because hidden within this dubious gray mass lay the true dietary wisdom of our ancestors. Many modern nutritionists would call such a diet an almost ideal plant-based diet, with a very high content of beneficial fiber. Beans provided the plant protein the body needed, seasonal vegetables supplied essential vitamins, and the long simmering process made even the toughest roots edible. It sounds very healthy and even trendy by today's standards of a healthy lifestyle, doesn't it? But there was one critical problem. This liquid diet was catastrophically lacking in fats and calories for hard physical labor. You were forced to work in the fields for 12 hours straight, burning thousands of calories under the scorching sun or in the pouring rain. And to replenish these enormous energy losses, you were offered practically empty liquid cabbage water with a couple of beans. It's roughly the same as trying to fuel a powerful race car with plain tap water and hoping for a sure victory. A peasant's body worked at the limit of its capabilities, constantly teetering on the brink of complete physical exhaustion. Every spoonful of such gruel was merely a temporary truce in man's eternal war against starvation. Ironically, today people pay huge sums of money at elite detox clinics for a very similar menu of vegetable broths. We call it by trendy terms like body cleansing and superfoods. But for a medieval peasant, it was just another ordinary Tuesday. They never had the option to choose whether to eliminate gluten from their diet or consciously switch to veganism. Their entire lives were one long period of forced veganism, punctuated by rare and highly prized bits of lard on major church holidays. Poverty dictated its own dietary rules, which modern people now voluntarily copy in the name of illusory health. It will take 500 years for science to prove that such a simple diet actually helps avoid many modern heart and vascular diseases. But medieval people couldn't care less about their cholesterol levels when their stomachs were literally gnawing with burning hunger. Just think about this paradox. They were physically healthier than us by many medical measures. And this was simply because they were too poor to suffer from the complex diseases of wealthy idlers. Their diet was a harsh filter that kept only the most resilient and unpretentious alive. In the Middle Ages, bread was not just a staple food, but a full-fledged currency, a measure of weight, and a person's social passport. If you ate white, soft, and well-baked bread made from pure wheat, you were officially considered part of the social elite. Peasants, on the other hand, were forced to chew on something black, incredibly hard, and consisting mainly of cheap rye or barley. In particularly famine-stricken years, they even added ground acorns or dried tree bark to the flour to increase the volume in some way. Such bread resembled a building brick more than the soft, fragrant baked goods we are accustomed to. This black bread was so hard that it was often used in place of regular plates, with such pieces being called trenchers. The main meal was laid out on these stale slices, and the bread gradually soaked up all the meat juices and rich sauces. After the meal was finished, this edible plate, saturated with flavors, was either eaten by the host himself or graciously thrown to the hungry dogs. Modern environmentalists would be absolutely thrilled by such a brilliant and waste-free concept of natural resource consumption. But for a simple pauper, this was a harsh reality. You either ate your plate or remained half-starved. But here's what's truly terrifying and makes one shudder about the history of using medieval rye for baking bread. Sometimes a treacherous parasitic fungus called ergot would take root in the ripening ears of grain, which outwardly resembled ordinary dark grains. If this infected grain ended up in the communal flour, the entire village would start seeing terrifying demons after breakfast. People felt as if their skin were literally burning alive, and their limbs were pierced by unbearable, knife-sharp pain. It was a mass poisoning that turned the lives of peaceful farmers into a living nightmare. This terrifying condition was called St. Anthony's fire in those days, and in essence, it was an uncontrollable mass LSD trip. The fungus released alkaloids that caused severe hallucinations in people and led to constriction of the blood vessels. The unfortunate victims would dance in frenzied ecstasy until they died or lose their blackened limbs due to gangrene setting in. Doctors of that time were powerless and believed this was a terrible divine punishment for sins or the machinations of evil witches. Today we know for certain that the cause of it all was poor grain cleaning and the complete absence of modern plant protection methods. Imagine a typical morning in a village where, after a meal, half the residents begin to converse earnestly with an unburned clump of grain. It sounds like the plot of a low-budget horror film, but such events occurred with frightening regularity for hundreds of years. Poor peasants simply had no choice but to eat the suspicious dark grain when all their winter supplies were running out. Hunger was far more terrifying than the ghostly possibility of going mad or falling ill from poisonous bread. They consciously ate this poison, knowing that the only alternative was an agonizing death by starvation within a week. It was a kind of culinary Russian roulette, where the main stakes in the game were your sanity and physical well-being. Today's strict food safety standards and sanitary controls would have seemed like high-level magic to the people of that era. In their brutal world, even the most ordinary loaf of bread could at any moment become a one-way ticket. Food was not merely fuel for the body, but a constant test of endurance and luck. And every day lived after such a breakfast was considered a true gift from fate. If you sincerely believe that in the harsh Middle Ages, ordinary people quenched their thirst with clean water from the nearest stream, then you are deeply and seriously mistaken. The water in the growing cities of that time was so dirty, murky, and dangerous that drinking it was considered a sure and swift path to dysentery. Wells were often located right next to cesspools, and bacteria seeped into the soil, contaminating all sources of life-sustaining water in the area. That's why absolutely every segment of the population, from tiny infants to the very elderly, drank beer or ale on a truly industrial scale. This was not a matter of a harmful habit, but a basic precaution to preserve life in unsanitary conditions. It's important to understand, however, that this was not at all the strong, bitter craft beer we're so accustomed to today in modern bars. Medieval ale was thick in consistency, incredibly nutritious, and contained very little pure alcohol. Why, then, was the consumption of this hoppy beverage so critically important for the biological survival of entire peoples? The secret lies in the fact that the brewing process itself required the water to be boiled for a long time in huge copper vats. During this heating process, the high temperature inadvertently killed most of the dangerous pathogenic bacteria and parasites living in the raw water. People of that time knew absolutely nothing about the existence of microbes, but they understood one important thing purely through experience. If they drank water from the river, people died quickly. If they drank freshly brewed ale, they remained alert and healthy. It was a brilliantly simple, ancient method of natural water purification that prevented human civilization from being wiped out by cholera within a couple of years. Moreover, ale was an excellent natural source of B vitamins, which were chronically lacking in the meager and monotonous everyday diet. Modern pediatric nutritionists would be horrified by the mere idea of giving young children beer for breakfast before school. But in 1300, having a jug of light ale on the table was considered a sign of responsible parenting and sincere concern for children's health. Without this drink, a child's diet would have been not only poor, but also deadly for their fragile body. It is interesting to note that for a long time, brewing was considered exclusively women's work and an important part of the household. Women who professionally brewed ale for sale to their neighbors were respectfully called alewives, and they were key figures in the economy of any village. They were respected for their craftsmanship, as the well-being of the entire surrounding community depended directly on the quality of their product. If a long green branch hung above the front door of a house, it was a signal understood by all. Fresh beer is ready here. Come on in. It was a kind of medieval advertisement that unfailingly lured thirsty travelers and locals in for a mug of the fresh brew. Ale was a kind of social glue that reliably brought the entire community together after a hard and exhausting day's work. Imagine a world where the blood alcohol level of every person you met was constantly maintained at a certain level of a few parts per thousand. This logically explains many of the strange behaviors of people from that time. Their sudden outbursts of rage and their incredible tolerance for harsh living conditions. By the strict standards of ancient Rome or our high-tech era, this was a society in a state of mild but permanent intoxication. Alcohol not only helped them stay healthy, but also smoothed out the rough edges of their difficult and often brutal reality. At the other, glittering end of the social ladder, the daily dining experience resembled an endless, lavish buffet at the finest Las Vegas hotel. For a wealthy lord or a powerful king, meat was not merely food to satisfy hunger, but a potent means of asserting their unlimited right to power. Their oak tables could simultaneously host the carcasses of deer, wild boars, herons, swans, and even exotic peacocks. The latter were often served roasted, yet artfully adorned with their own vibrant feathers to create a theatrical effect. Each such feast was a political gesture designed to overwhelm guests with the host's grandeur and wealth. While a poor peasant might eat meat only a couple of times a year on major holidays, a wealthy person consumed it in enormous portions every single day. This inevitably led to the emergence of diseases that were considered at the time to be exclusively elite and even noble. One of these was gout, caused by an excess of animal protein and purines in the body, which led to joint inflammation. Suffering from gout and limping back then was almost as prestigious as owning your own stone castle or a warhorse. It was a direct and undeniable sign that you were so fabulously wealthy that you could literally gorge yourself on meat. But there is one important detail hidden here that seems absolutely insane to us today and extremely illogical from a biological standpoint. The aristocrats of that time sincerely despised any fresh vegetables and fruits, considering them food exclusively for beggars and coarse peasants. In high society, there was a firm belief that foods growing deep in the earth had a low, coarse nature. It was believed that such food was suitable only for commoners, whose bodies were accustomed to hard labor and simple fare. The closer a food was to dirt and manure, the less it deserved the attention of a noble person of status. A nobleman, according to the sages of the time, was supposed to eat only what flew high in the clear sky or ran swiftly through the forests. Therefore, ordinary carrots, beets, or onions on a lord's banquet table would have been considered a grave insult to his high status and knightly dignity. The wealthy voluntarily forwent essential vitamins in favor of enormous portions of game and very fatty, spicy sauces. As a result, Kings and dukes often suffered from scurvy, bleeding gums, and chronic digestive problems, despite all their chests of gold. Paradoxically, their wealth made their diet less balanced and more dangerous. Modern licensed doctors would unequivocally call such a specific diet a complete disaster and a direct path to an early and painful death. But for the medieval mindset, it was the highest, almost absolute form of ostentatious consumption of all available natural resources. Why waste time eating a healthy green salad when you can ostentatiously devour an entire roasted deer, emphasizing your power over the world? It's roughly the same as if someone today were to eat nothing but gold bars, completely ignoring ordinary and wholesome human food. Demonstrating superiority was far more important to them than their own longevity or the absence of stomach aches. The gap in the quality and composition of food between social classes in the Middle Ages was so great that people began to physically resemble members of different biological species. Wealthy aristocrats were noticeably taller, broader-shouldered, and yet suffered from numerous diseases of excess and obesity. At the same time, the poor remained small, thin, and wiry. Their bodies were hardened by constant malnutrition and coarse fiber. Food in those days literally shaped social classes, making class inequality visible to the naked eye on every street corner. By what lay on your plate, one could unerringly determine your entire lineage and place in the world hierarchy. If you had offered a medieval knight the choice between a sack of pure gold or a sack of ordinary black pepper, he would have given the answer serious thought. In those distant times, spices were not merely aromatic seasonings to enhance flavor, but the most valuable and liquid commodity in the known world. Cloves, cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg were shipped from distant India and mysterious Indonesia through thousands of greedy middlemen. Traveling a long way along caravan routes and stormy seas, they accumulated incredible markups and became insanely expensive. Every grain of spice literally absorbed the cost of sailors' lives and the risk of distant voyages. A small pinch of pepper in the 14th century could cost as much as the annual rent for an entire farm, complete with all its buildings, fields, and livestock. Therefore, when a wealthy lord ordered a festive dish, he demanded that the chef add as many different spices as possible. The food was not meant merely to satisfy hunger. It was meant to literally shout to every guest just how much gold had been spent on its preparation. The lord of the castle wanted the aroma of spices to be detectable even as guests approached the dining hall, affirming his exceptional status. It was a time when the taste of the food was secondary to the financial statement it conveyed. Ironically, with this approach, the taste of the food itself often became secondary, strange, and, to us today, even frankly unpleasant. Dishes were so overloaded with cinnamon, ginger, and sugar that a modern person would hardly be able to swallow more than a single small bite. Imagine a fatty roast goose that tastes more like a cloying Middle Eastern sweet than succulent roasted meat. Culinary harmony was sacrificed to the display of wealth, turning the meal into an ordeal for the taste buds. It was believed that if a dish did not contain a mountain of expensive spices, the host was either bankrupt or indecently stingy. For a long time, there was a myth in historical literature that spices were used solely to mask the taste of spoiled meat. But this is simply untrue. The wealthy always had the freshest meat from their own forests. They simply wanted it to smell like an exotic Eastern bazaar. Spices served as a kind of powerful social signal that told those around them, "I am so powerful that I buy goods from the other side of the world." It was the medieval equivalent of buying designer brand-name clothing with huge gold logos on display. The stronger the nutmeg scent wafting from a plate, the higher the status of the person sitting at the head of the table. Today, we routinely buy a jar of ground pepper at the nearest supermarket for next to nothing and don't even think about its origin. To an ordinary person of the 14th century, such accessibility would have seemed like a true miracle or an incredible, fantastical generosity from the heavens. In their world, spices held such stable value that they were even used as a form of payment for state taxes or as a dowry for noble daughters. Entire fortunes were passed down in the form of small boxes containing dried clove buds or cinnamon sticks. The economies of entire regions depended on these fragile plant-based cargoes, which were hunted by pirates and armies alike. Imagine for a moment that you're paying at the store checkout not with a plastic card, but with a couple of cinnamon sticks and a small pinch of grated ginger. It sounds funny and absurd, but this is exactly how the global economy and international trade were built and developed over the course of several centuries. A love for spicy and aromatic food literally drove people to discover new continents, equip massive fleets, and sail across uncharted oceans. Your everyday habit of salting and peppering your food once cost the lives of thousands of brave sailors and shrewd merchants during the Age of Discovery. Our entire modern world was shaped by the pursuit of a flavor that today costs less than a cup of coffee. In the Middle Ages, people's lives were governed not by personal desires or whims, but by the strict and unyielding calendar of the Catholic Church. On nearly half of all days of the year, it was officially forbidden to eat meat, eggs, or any dairy products due to numerous fasts. This included every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday of the week, as well as several long fasts lasting several weeks, including the strictest one, Lent before Easter. Church rules were mandatory for everyone without exception, creating a unified rhythm of life for millions of people across Europe. It was a global system of control over the human body and its basic needs. This meant that even the wealthiest and most capricious lord was forced to regularly switch to a diet of fish and plain vegetables. The church controlled your stomach just as strictly and vigilantly as it controlled your innermost thoughts and hopes for the salvation of your soul after death. Violating the established fast was considered a very serious sin, which could lead to public censure by the community or the payment of a large fine. Religion dictated what would be on your plate on a specific Tuesday or Friday, leaving no room for culinary freedom. Fasting was a time of humility, meant to make everyone equal before the Lord, if only in terms of the menu. But the rich and powerful have always been true masters at finding clever loopholes in any rules and laws. If church canon forbade eating the meat of warm-blooded animals, the aristocracy began classifying as fish almost anything that lived in water at least part of the time. Thus, beavers suddenly made it onto the list of fish and permitted dishes because of their scaly tails, and even some species of wild waterfowl. This allowed the nobility to continue feasting without formally violating the strict prescriptions of the Holy Fathers. The line between fish and meat became very blurred when it came to the appetite of a powerful feudal lord. In that era, there were entire cookbooks devoted entirely to how to artfully prepare fish so that it tasted like juicy venison or tender beef. It was true medieval biohacking aimed at skillfully circumventing divine precepts for the sake of preserving one's own gastronomic pleasure. Imagine a cook spending hours trying to mold a semblance of a chicken drumstick with a bone out of finely chopped cod fillet to please his master. Such tricks required tremendous skill and allowed the wealthy to endure the hardships of fasting in relative comfort and with familiar flavors. For the common poor, however, any days of fasting were a time of even harsher trials, real deprivation, and physical weakness. They had no access to expensive fresh river fish, so they had to make do with the cheapest salted herring or dried cod. This bread of the oceans was as hard as a roadside stone, and it had to be soaked in water for days to make it even slightly edible. Often the fish was of dubious quality, but the peasants simply had no choice, for hunger is no joke. A poor person's diet during Lent became even more meager and monotonous than on ordinary days, undermining their already fragile health. The heavy, pungent smell of cheap salted fish permeated the cramped homes of the poor, becoming the very scent of their daily struggle for survival. Fasting gradually transformed from a profound spiritual exercise into yet another vivid way to highlight the chasm between social classes. While wealthy lords feasted on exquisite fish beavers served with spicy sauces, poor peasants choked on rancid herring, dreaming of a simple piece of lard. Religious rules intended to unite people in faith, in reality only served to highlight the glaring inequality of the medieval world. The calendar dictated abstinence, but the burden of this abstinence was distributed throughout society in an extremely unfair manner. At the very end of the classical Middle Ages, cane sugar began to flood into Europe, marking the beginning of a new era of true culinary madness. Until then, the only sweetener available to people was natural honey, which was expensive and far from accessible to everyone. Sugar, however, was brought from distant overseas plantations and new colonies, and it instantly became the favorite pastime of the aristocracy across all European countries. It was a sweet revolution that forever changed the elite's taste habits and brought with it new, previously unknown health problems. The new product was considered so valuable and prestigious that people began adding it indiscriminately to everything: meat, fish, wine, and even vegetable side dishes. A widespread craze began for giant, intricate sugar sculptures known as subtilities, which were proudly displayed on tables during lavish feasts. These were true architectural works of art, castles, knights, and mythical beasts, which could be ceremoniously eaten after the guests had had their fill of admiring them. Sugar became a malleable medium for displaying wealth, turning every dessert into a grand spectacle. The more sugar a host spent on such decorations, the higher his social standing was regarded. But this bright and sweet life had a very dark, extremely painful side that doctors of the time didn't even suspect. Dentistry in those harsh times was limited to the crude pliers of the local blacksmith, and toothpaste and toothbrushes simply hadn't been invented yet. Concentrated sugar destroyed the teeth of the elite at an incredible rate, literally burning away the enamel and turning them into black, rotten stumps in a matter of years. Toothache became a constant companion of kings and dukes who could not deny themselves the pleasure of eating yet another candied fruit. The sweet poison worked slowly but surely, robbing people of the ability to chew their food properly. And here is where the story takes a truly absurd turn. Black, rotten teeth suddenly came to be regarded as an indisputable sign of great wealth and nobility. The logic was simple and ruthless. If you had black stumps in your mouth, it meant you were so rich that you could afford to buy sugar in vast quantities. It got to the point where people who were too poor to buy sugar would deliberately blacken their healthy teeth with soot to appear wealthier in the eyes of their neighbors. Physical decay became a desirable attribute, confirming a person's financial standing. Beauty was sacrificed to status in the most literal and terrifying sense of the word. Any modern dentist would likely weep in horror upon reading detailed descriptions of this strange period in human history. It was a unique era when obvious physical ugliness became a fashion trend solely because of the sky-high cost of the product that caused it. The famous English Queen Elizabeth I was widely known for her completely black teeth, and all her ladies-in-waiting tried to imitate her in every way. They voluntarily ruined their smiles to meet the high standards set by the monarch. Social pressure compelled people to pursue tooth decay as the ultimate good and a symbol of belonging to the circle of the chosen few. Your innocent love of sweets in the 14th century would literally cost you your smile, fresh breath, and basic gum health. The medieval menu was a battlefield where every dessert was an attack on the body. This proves that the human desire for status has always been stronger than common sense and the instinct for self-preservation. If you order a salad at a restaurant today, you believe you're making a healthy and wise choice. In the Middle Ages, people would have looked at you as someone committing slow suicide or having lost their mind. There was a firm belief that raw vegetables caused cold illnesses and stomach upset in anyone. Doctors advised boiling vegetables for as long as possible until they turned into a homogeneous, colorless mush. It was believed that heat treatment killed the evil spirits and harmful juices hidden inside every plant. Therefore, a crisp salad was something out of the realm of fantasy or extreme survival for the most desperate. Root vegetables, such as carrots, beets, and turnips, which grew in the dirt, were viewed with particular disdain. People believed in a chain of being where everything closer to the sky was pure and everything in the earth was dirty. Vegetables were associated with the hard labor of peasants and poverty, which no one wanted to flaunt. A wealthy person might eat a little fruit, but only in the form of thick jam or baked with a heap of spices. Fruit was considered too moist, and it had to be balanced with dry spices like cinnamon. This complex system of medical beliefs dictated what people should put in their mouths every day. As a result, medieval people voluntarily deprived themselves of a huge amount of vitamins and beneficial micronutrients. This led to a situation where, even with an abundance of calories, many suffered from hidden hunger and vitamin deficiency. You could eat an entire goose, yet still have bleeding gums due to a lack of basic vitamin C. Modern science would have proven to them that their fear of raw carrots was completely unfounded and harmful. But tradition and the authority of ancient physicians were stronger than common sense and the instinct for self-preservation. In essence, they were hostages to their own false theories about how the human body works. Imagine you don't have a refrigerator, it's the height of summer, and you need to preserve meat. In the Middle Ages, you had only one reliable ally in this endless struggle: ordinary salt. Salt was a strategic resource over which wars were fought and entire thriving cities were built. Almost everything people ate in winter was either heavily salted, dried, or smoked until it was as hard as a shoe sole. Meat and fish were buried in salt in huge barrels, where they could be stored for months on end in dark cellars. It was the only way to survive the winter when nature goes dormant and fresh food disappears. But there was one serious culinary problem here that is hard for us to accept today. Salted food was so salty that it was impossible to eat without soaking it for hours in several changes of water. Even after that, the meat retained a distinct taste and required thick sauces to cut through the saltiness. This explains why medieval recipes contain so much wine, vinegar, and honey as a base for gravies. Cooks tried to balance extreme flavors by creating combinations of sweet, sour, and salty that seem strange to us. This was not a matter of haute cuisine, but of simply masking the taste of preserved foods. For the poor, salt was a luxury that consumed a significant portion of their modest annual budget. There were special taxes on salt, which were among the most hated and unjust in history. If you couldn't buy salt, your meat would simply rot, and you'd be left without supplies for the long winter. This forced people to find other ways to preserve food, such as storing grain in deep, dry pits. Salt was literally a matter of life and death, not just a seasoning on the dinner table. The next time you salt your soup, remember that people used to spend their last pennies on this very gesture. A meal in a medieval castle was not just a meal, but a complex theatrical performance. Your seat at the table determined your social status for the next few years and the Lord's attitude toward you. The most important guests sat on a raised platform under a canopy, while the less significant ones sat on simple benches below. There were entire books of rules on how to properly dip your fingers into a communal bowl and avoid smacking your lips. Knives and spoons were often personal items, carried in special leather sheaths on a belt. Forks were considered a devilish invention and a sign of effeminacy that a proper knight would never accept. Interestingly, people ate from communal dishes, yet maintained a surprising distance and caution. You were supposed to pick up a piece of food using only 3 fingers of your right hand because the left was considered unclean. This rule stemmed from a time when hygiene was a matter of life and death, and there was no toilet paper. Wiping your hands on the tablecloth was perfectly normal and even encouraged, provided the tablecloth was intended for that purpose. Tables were often simply planks on trestles, which were cleared away immediately after the grand feast ended. It was a world where your every movement at the table was scrutinized by dozens of eyes for signs of nobility. To a modern person, such a meal would seem both unsanitary and incredibly stuffy and complicated. We are used to individual plates and a set of 5 forks, which seem to us the pinnacle of civilization. For a medieval person, sharing a meal from a single bowl was a symbol of trust and brotherhood among warriors. But at the same time, you always had to remember who was in charge and not reach for the best piece before your lord. A breach of etiquette could result in you simply being thrown out of service without explanation. Food was a battlefield for social recognition, where your weapons were your manners and your ability to carry yourself with dignity. In the Middle Ages, forests were not public property where anyone could hunt at will. Almost every patch of land and every animal on it belonged to the king or a powerful local feudal lord. Hunting was the nobility's favorite pastime and their exclusive privilege, which they defended with frenzied cruelty. If a peasant was caught with a dead deer, the punishment could be death or blinding at the scene of the crime. The meat of wild animals was a symbol of absolute power, to which commoners were forever barred. This created a situation where people starved while watching herds of animals run past their huts. But hunger is a poor advisor, so poaching flourished despite all the risks and terrible punishments. The legends of Robin Hood did not arise out of thin air, but from a real struggle for the right to forest resources and food. Peasants set snares for hares and birds, hoping that the foresters wouldn't notice the disappearance of a few small animals. It was a constant game of cat and mouse in the dense forests, where a hearty dinner or the gallows stood at stake. Game on a poor man's table was a sign of either incredible luck or a deadly crime against the crown. The meat smelled not only of spices, but also of the risk of being caught and executed as a warning to others. For the aristocracy, however, hunting was training for real war and a way to rally their loyal vassals. They spent enormous sums on maintaining kennels, falconry, and an army of professional huntsmen. The feast following a successful hunt was the culmination of their social status, where mountains of meat affirmed their right to rule this land. They ate what they had hunted themselves, turning the act of eating into an act of domination over nature and people. The poor, however, could only dream of the taste of fresh venison, contenting themselves with bones if they were thrown to the dogs after the feast. This disparity in access to protein was one of the most unjust features of medieval society and its laws. If you think your kitchen is cramped and uncomfortable, take a look at a typical medieval castle kitchen. It was a huge, dark room with gigantic open hearths where an entire bull could be roasted. The temperature there was so high that the cooks worked nearly naked, drenched in sweat and constantly at risk of burns. Smoke filled the room, settling as black soot on the walls, ceiling, and, of course, on the food being prepared. It was a veritable hellish workshop where dozens of people toiled to feed hundreds of guests in the main hall. No exhaust fans, no ventilation, just heat, noise, and the endless hustle and bustle of the kitchen staff. The head chef was the boss here, commanding this army with a heavy spoon and a shout. Under his command were the cooks, whose job was to turn the meat spits for hours on end. Imagine the scene: heat, smoke, a barking dog in a wheel, and people butchering carcasses right on the floor. Hygiene, as we understand it, was completely absent there, but the scale of the food preparation would have amazed any guest. Preparing a single festive meal could require weeks of preparation and tons of firewood to keep the fire going. For the poor, however, the kitchen was limited to a single pot hanging over the hearth in the middle of their one-room home. The family's entire life revolved around this fire, which provided both warmth and light as well as meager hot meals. Everything was cooked in that pot, from morning porridge to evening cabbage with a piece of old lard for flavor. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, simultaneously blackening all the belongings and the lungs of the inhabitants of this modest dwelling. The kitchen was the heart of the home, but a harsh heart that demanded constant attention to firewood and the cleanliness of the cauldron. The difference in the size of the kitchens underscored the gulf between those who live to eat and those who eat to live. In the Middle Ages, your favorite drink depended entirely on which part of Europe you happened to be born in. The South, including France, Italy, and Spain, was the realm of wine, which was considered a noble and pure drink. Everyone drank wine, but its quality ranged from elite vintages to sour vinegar, which was given to slaves and soldiers. It was often diluted with water and spiced to make the taste more refined and pleasant for the gentry. Wine was considered a medicine and a symbol of the Christian faith, which gave its consumption a special, almost sacred meaning. To a Southerner, beer was a barbaric swill, unworthy of the attention of a civilized and cultured person. In the North, however, in England and Germany, ale reigned supreme because grapes grew very poorly there, or not at all. Ale was the staple of the diet, providing people with calories and a safe drink throughout the day. It was brewed from barley or oats and was much thicker and more nutritious than modern light lagers. Northerners took pride in their ability to brew strong drinks that helped keep them warm during the long, cold winters. Even the kings of the North did not turn their noses up at good ale, though imported wine was always present on their tables for prestige. This alcoholic divide split Europe into two distinct cultures of diet and lifestyle for many centuries. But here's the interesting part. Importing wine to the North was a massive business that made merchants fabulously wealthy and influential. Delivering barrels of wine from Bordeaux to London was a complex and dangerous logistical operation for that time. Wine was expensive, so it was sipped in small sips from beautiful goblets, demonstrating one's refined and expensive taste. The poor in the north could only taste wine on major church holidays or from the hands of a generous host. Beer, on the other hand, was always available, becoming a symbol of the simplicity and folksiness of northern traditions and drinking customs. Your mug of ale or glass of wine said more about your background than your accent or the cut of your clothes. The conclusion of a medieval feast was a time for the wildest and most expensive culinary fantasies imaginable. Desserts made entirely of sugar and marzipan were served, imitating castles, animals, or biblical scenes. These delicacies were so intricately detailed that guests were sometimes afraid to touch them, lest they destroy their beauty. Sugar was a symbol of humanity's triumph over nature and an exotic gift from distant and mysterious eastern lands. After heavy meats and rich sauces, such sweets seemed to guests like a heavenly delight and the pinnacle of culinary art. But behind this beauty lay a price that not everyone was willing to pay with their physical health and wealth. As we already know, sugar mercilessly destroyed the teeth of the aristocracy, turning their lives into a series of endless toothaches. But this was not the only problem for those with a sweet tooth in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. An excess of sugar and calories led to obesity and diabetes, which doctors of the time were unable to even diagnose. The wealthy literally ate themselves to death, viewing excess weight as a sign of health and the prosperity of their family. A potbelly in men and curvy figures in women were the fashionable standards of beauty, which would greatly surprise us today. Being thin meant being poor and sick, while being overweight meant being successful and highly influential. The poor, on the other hand, could only dream of sweets, contenting themselves with rare honey or wild berries during the summer season. Their dessert was often simple porridge, sweetened with carrots or beets if they were available in the garden. The contrast between the sugar castle on the Lord's table and a piece of stale bread for the peasant was stark and glaring. Sugar became the final chord in the symphony of social inequality that played out in every medieval kitchen in Europe. After all, food in the Middle Ages was not about taste, but about which rung of the ladder you stood on. And that ladder was built of bread, meat, and spices, which determined your fate until the very end. The medieval diet is a story of incredible resilience for some and insane excess for others in a cruel world. The gap between a bowl of gray gruel and a roasted peacock was an abyss that could not be bridged in a single human lifetime. Food determined everything, from the color of your teeth and your height to how many years you could live on this harsh earth. We often romanticize nightly feasts, forgetting that for 90% of the population, food was a daily struggle for mere biological survival. Today, when we open the refrigerator, we possess a wealth that even the most powerful kings of the past could not have dreamed of. Perhaps we should appreciate our plate of food a little more, knowing the culinary hell humanity went through to feed us today. The history of medieval food teaches us that we truly are what we eat and how we obtain it.